Tom, thanks for joining us today out here in beautiful Laguna Niguel in the LSI conference.
Thanks so much, Joe. Thanks for having me.
You bet, and you're right outside here. It's like we're neighbors out here too.
Yeah, absolutely.
It's good to be back, isn't it?
Oh, it's amazing. You know, too long to get back here to this meeting, but you know, through the pandemic, we knew that we'd be back here.
Mm-hmm. Were you busy with PRIA through the pandemic?
Absolutely, yeah. You know, we work with a lot of early stage and mid stage companies who obviously had some difficulty through the period, and you know, being a partner, we wanted to work very closely with them through that pandemic and ensure that we maintain that customer relationship through the process. So a lot of conversations, a lot of hand wringing, but we got through it all together.
And PRIA is, broadly speaking, in the reimbursement business, right? And with emerging tech companies primarily?
Primarily emerging technology companies. We support innovative procedures so that patients have unfettered access. You know, we'll work diligently with the manufacturer to ensure that patients that need access to the device that they've brought to market, they have that ability to access the device.
And you know, there's a, what was it, 2016, I think, the breakthrough designation, is that right?
Yeah.
And Paul was chatting about that on the keynote today.
Yes.
And I think the intention of breakthrough was fantastic for the medtech startup industry in general. But was there also some caution around that with breakthrough?
Well, I think that the intention of breakthrough is to ensure that technologies that truly were breakthrough had a faster path from a regulatory perspective. With that, there's now been this MCIT rule that's come into play, and it's currently delayed. So MCIT is essentially a means to have reimbursement and coverage for breakthrough designated technologies. Unfortunately, today it's delayed. The implementation of it is delayed.
And for our audience, for them to understand that, because if some of them are not in the emerging tech world and they've been primarily in the big strategic, you've got an entire army of people that help with that, and oftentimes pathway to reimbursement defines technology. Absolutely. In the large strategics. So there's that valley of death in the startup world, right? You've got this technology that you develop. It's clearly got clinical benefits. It clearly, you know, the efficacy's there, safety's there. However, there's not a clear shot on goal to reimbursement out of the gate. That's
typical. So the reimbursement system in the U.S. is fractured, it's flawed, it's distributed. Those are all very difficult market problems for even a large strategic to navigate, let alone some of the emerging companies. But the most important thing is that if we can stay connected to a patient, and everybody at this meeting, they might have different incentives or different goals, but really if a patient gets the right technology at the right time, at the right cost, every stakeholder in this building wins, payers included. So.
How are you seeing the environment now? You've been in the industry for a number of years like I have. I think this is my 32nd year. We used to make things, and we still make things. A catheter, an implantable device, an anchor, a valve, a stent. Now this digital transition, clearly, probably at scale, more of an impact economically on the cost of healthcare, which is 20% of our GDP. How do I get paid if I'm a SaaS product? How do I get paid if I'm a telehealth product that isn't quite me connecting me with my clinician, but it offers a telehealth connection? Is that a puzzle still to be figured out?
So with some technologies it is, with some digital health programs it is. And really the issue in the US market is that the existing structures and pathways of reimbursement constrain good decisions, right? So what will always hold true is that if you articulate the value to the right stakeholder that has money on the table, things can change. So that's essentially what we do at PRE is we ensure that the value message of a given technology gets to the payer in what I'd call payer language.
So give me an example. You might not want to give me, or maybe you can, give me a specific of if not but for in that situation, because startups usually are lean and they rarely will have a reimbursement function in the organization. Right. They'll worry about regulatory, but you and I have chatted, the regulatory part of our government and the reimbursement part of our government don't even live on the same landmass.
Right. They don't talk very well to each other. So, yeah, I mean, you brought up the valley of death. Yeah. You know, I was with Medtronic for 17 years, and you know, even with Medtronic, you know, very well-resourced organization, there were products that failed because of patient access, because of reimbursement, because of this flawed reimbursement system. And what we do is we ensure that a provider or a patient doesn't just disappear off the face of the earth because one payer said no. We ensure that that message from the patient's voice continues up the chain and builds demand at that payer's doorstep. When demand is truly palpable to a payer, they really can't run from it. And from the perspective of emerging companies, we generate that short-term utilization that's so important to not only capital and cash flow, but also for building momentum in the market. This is the momentum game.
Because you know, we're at a startup show here, right? LSI
Yep.
Startups, and reimbursement is probably the number one that investors are looking for.
Absolutely.
You know, sure, there are some self-pays, yeah, so the aesthetic space, LASIK space, those others. But for the most part, medtech is not a self-pay, nor has a self-pay strategy to it. And payers, they're in the business of not paying.
Yeah, yeah.
So that equation is confounding to me. So we have these new technologies come up. They potentially save the patient from longer term expenses in their journey to recovered health, or at least maintaining maybe not even chronic care.
Exactly.
And payers by design make more money when they don't pay because of a new technology.
Yeah, it's unfortunate. It's really screwed up, right? But it's true. When a payer pays for medical care, it's called medical loss. Medical loss. The insurance pool's shrunk.
Yeah.
So essentially, you know, we have to get payers to the table in a real way. The way that payers price their plans is part of that, in that you know, payers are looking at their entire membership and they're doing some actuarial science, and they're going back and they're looking at, okay, here's the incidence of this procedure, here's the incidence of that. So when something really new comes to the market, kind of throws things off for them. So it's easy to say no early.
Yeah, because most of it's based on retrospective experience, not in prospective. And you know, one of the things, I'm chatting later today with Proximy, with Nadine Hashasharam, who, you know, has got a fabulous telehealth solution. And when you look at those solutions, if you could figure out from the payer side or the insurer's side how to potentially limit the liability from locking up capital for the length of that liability, whether it's malpractice or, you know, some sort of car accident, if you will.
Yep.
And I can use a telehealth solution to not eliminate the risk, but greatly reduce it on my actuarial tables, and then liberate that capital to do something else.
Exactly.
Shouldn't I be interested in supporting that?
You absolutely should. And they have to be walked through that process, right? They have to be walked through the understanding of why it's good for them. I can list hundreds of devices where in my heart of hearts, I was like, this is good for you. Why is there not a established pathway to have this paid by payers? But you know, some people have to learn the hard way, actually.
Well, I think it has everything to do with timelines too, doesn't it? Like today it might not make sense, but if this patient stays in the path of care for another 12 years because, how do you figure that out? So
the problem with the U.S. healthcare system is that the average payer holds on to a patient for about 26 months. So when we start talking about longer time frames, it makes absolute sense when we think patient-centered, because that's what we're supposed to do.
Right.
But when you take that stakeholder seat of a payer who's going to hang on to a patient for 26 months, they might not see that longevity.
They're going to kick that can down the road.
Exactly. I'm not here, trying to
No.
stump for a single payer.
Right.
But there has to be a recognition that we need to start aligning our systems in a more patient-centric way.
It's a rational conversation to have. Not that either of us are lobbying for it. I'm just looking at it from, is the current model structured so that the rate of acceleration right now of diagnostics, ongoing therapy, management of chronic care, is it designed properly for the emerging population? That's the question.
I mean, it has to be. I mean, it absolutely has to be. And that if you look at healthcare, you talked about things, right? We made things, we had tools. It started with mechanical things. It became more stimulating, or electricity. Now we're getting into this age where data is really important. Sensing, or sensors, is really important. Processing that information is really important, because it should inform care. It should inform that patient's journey. So a lot to unpack there with kind of the Internet of Things around surgery and med tech, but it's a very exciting time, because we're pulling in technologies and tools laterally from different industries that are really going to unlock some amazing things for this market.
Yeah. And the centers of care are changing too. We're starting to see the emergence of ambulatory surgical centers, especially in the orthopedic space, having an accelerated rate of sort of exodus from the large brick hospitals in the middle of town, who maybe weren't appropriate focus factories.
Right.
And reimbursement, CMS has walked in now, interestingly enough, over the last year or two, and started on the reimbursement side with a different perspective on those, and almost sharing in that risk with the owners and the clinicians within the ASCs. Do you see that
Absolutely.
being a canary in the coal mine for cardiology and women's health and other focus factories like ASCs?
You're absolutely going to see more specialization in healthcare. Any industry that needs to progress beyond its current day, you're going to have lanes of specialization. The move to less restrictive settings of care, less costly settings of care, is something that's not going to stop at any time. And I mean, we might look at 5 years from now, it's going to be a very heavy ASC market that's specialty dominated. But if we talk 15, 20 years from now, we're talking about home-based or office-based procedures. So it's just how innovation diffuses.
And then finally, chronic care. I think 80% of our spend in that 20% GDP is managing chronic care, with diseases like diabetes. And is that viewed differently longitudinally from the cost of a patient versus a very specific trauma case or device, and then that lifetime cost of that patient from a pharmaceutical perspective, a biotech perspective, a medical device perspective, and just the interaction of human using, again, telehealth from the home?
Right. So I think that there's a few things behind chronic care management. The first is that we treat what has already happened, right? We're treating the sequelae of the issues, whether it's diabetes or heart failure, and essentially we have to get to a spot where it's more treating the patient along the way, not just the symptoms. Yeah. So there's a lot going on in the digital health space right now in terms of leveraging CBT to essentially help patients do the right thing for themselves. They have to be part of this journey too. And I really see digital health plays supporting the overall innovation that will happen in the med tech market. There'll be a lot of companion type apps that will be essentially paired with devices in the future.
It's an exciting area, and there's a lot of investment money going in there, right? You've got the last mile with the smartphone, So you can connect there, especially for chronic care. And on the rehab side too, you're seeing that especially in ortho with all the sensors built into a phone from an ambulatory perspective, from being able to see if you're doing your rehab, from a intelligence around compliance on pharmaceuticals. So I think it's going to be a really interesting time for you, and it sounds like Priya is going to be busy as hell trying to navigate that.
Very exciting, interesting time. So.
Thanks. Well, I appreciate you spending time with us at the conference.
Thank you, Jim. Appreciate it.
Thanks, bud. Joe Mullings from LSI. Be well.